Welcome back to Ben's Book Club. Today we are diving into the book Rethinking Transportation 2020-2030. Back in 2017, a think tank called RethinkX, led by Tony Seba and James Arbib, dropped an absolutely massive, explosive forecast on the world. Their big claim? That autonomous vehicles were going to completely end private car ownership. And not, 50 years from now, but incredibly soon. The math behind this whole thesis is just fascinating. And looking at how that bold prediction is aging today tells us a whole lot about the future of mobility.
Okay, let's dive into this. The core argument here isn't just about trading in your old gas guzzler for a sleek new electric vehicle. No, it envisions a total, system-wide disruption of how we use vehicles altogether. Seba and Arbib argue we're on the cusp of a shift where the private automobile itself actually becomes obsolete for the average person. Think about it for a second. 100 years ago, horses were literally the backbone of transportation. Today, they're basically a hobbyist pursuit. The authors are proposing that individual car ownership is heading toward that exact same fate. Possible for people who truly love it, but entirely economically unnecessary for the vast majority of us.
The end of ownership, the convergence of technology.
The authors base their whole thesis on this unique moment in time when three distinct exponential technology curves cross. We're talking about the simultaneous convergence of electric vehicles getting super cheap due to dropping battery costs, AI reaching full autonomous driving capabilities, and the massive scale of ride-hailing networks. This convergence creates a brand new model called Transport as a Service, or TaaS. Instead of buying a car, taking out a crazy high-interest loan, paying monthly for insurance, dealing with unexpected maintenance, and, my personal favorite, desperately searching for parking in crowded cities, you just summon a ride from a fleet of autonomous electric vehicles. You pay for exactly the mobility you need, entirely on demand. Imagine never having to worry about an oil change, a fender bender, or a parking meter ever again.
So the crucial point here is just how fast the authors predicted this switch would happen. They modeled that within just 10 years of regulatory approval for autonomous vehicles, a staggering 95% of all U.S. passenger miles traveled would be served by these fleet-owned TaaS vehicles. That means the vast, overwhelming majority of our movement, our commutes, our grocery runs, weekend trips, would shift away from individually owned cars almost overnight. A 95% behavioral shift of this magnitude in just a single decade, that's historically unprecedented.
The TaaS economic engine, the math behind the madness.
Now you might be wondering why anyone would be so confident that Americans, who clearly have a deep cultural love affair with their cars, would just hand over the keys so quickly. Well, the answer is that this transition isn't driven by environmental idealism or some sudden cultural desire to share. It's driven by pure, undeniable, ruthless economics. A privately owned car is an incredibly inefficient asset. Think about your own car right now. It sits parked in your driveway, then it's parked at your office, then it's parked at the store. It remains completely idle roughly 96% of its life. You're paying thousands of dollars for thousands of pounds of metal to literally just sit there. A TaaS fleet vehicle, on the other hand, operates continuously throughout the day, seamlessly serving multiple passengers. Because that autonomous vehicle is almost always moving, the initial capital cost of buying it is spread incredibly thin across many, many more miles.
And this brilliantly illustrates the feedback loop we're looking at, a literal death spiral for the internal combustion engine. Higher utilization of these autonomous fleets directly leads to a much lower cost per trip. That irresistibly lower price naturally attracts more users to the platform, which then pushes private car usage down even further. As holding onto a depreciating asset becomes way less economical and far less convenient than just tapping a button on your phone, people simply stop buying new cars. And that just accelerates the cycle even further.
This high utilization builds into an exponential cost advantage. Traditional gas-powered cars last, maybe 140,000 miles before the maintenance costs completely outweigh the value of the vehicle? But electric vehicles are fundamentally different. Since they have a fraction of the moving parts of a combustion engine, commercial-grade EVs can easily last over 500,000 miles. When you combine that extreme longevity with the complete removal of human driver wages, which, right now, make up the lion's share of traditional ride-hailing costs, the per-mile cost of transport absolutely crashes. The book estimates TaaS could ultimately be 4 to 10 times cheaper per mile than buying and operating a new car yourself. Anchoring these macroeconomics to your actual wallet reveals something pretty staggering. The report projected that the average American family would save $5,600 a year in transportation costs just by switching entirely to TaaS. That's the equivalent of a massive 10% wage boost for the average working family.
When you multiply that across the entire population, you're looking at unlocking an unprecedented $1 trillion in consumer spending power every single year. That's $1 trillion no longer tied up in car payments and auto insurance, suddenly freed up to flow directly into local economies, housing, education, you name it.
Winners, losers, and oil. The macroeconomic fallout.
Now, what's really interesting here is that with an economic force that powerful, the blast radius of this disruption is going to be immense. Trillions of dollars in value are set to be destroyed in some sectors, while entirely new empires are built in others. The book estimated that the total number of passenger vehicles in the U.S. would plummet from around 247 million to just 44 million. Because a highly utilized fleet car drives 10 times as many miles in a year as a private car does, we simply wouldn't need to manufacture nearly as many physical vehicles. Out of that drastically reduced 44 million, just 26 million autonomous TaaS vehicles would be needed to handle the vast majority of all our daily transportation. The industrial implications of manufacturing millions fewer cars every single year? Staggering.
And this incredible efficiency triggers a direct, devastating hit to the global oil industry. Light-duty road transportation has historically been a massive pillar of oil demand. If we shift in mass to high-utilization electric fleets, the report forecasts global oil demand dropping from roughly 100 million barrels a day down to 70 million. A demand shock of that severity could easily collapse global oil prices to around $25 a barrel. This wouldn't just mean lower gas prices. It would turn massive capital-intensive infrastructure, deep-water rigs, sprawling refineries, thousands of miles of pipelines into permanent, massively unprofitable stranded assets.
The value shift here is absolutely brutal. The likely losers are the traditional, deeply entrenched pillars of the 20th century economy: internal combustion engine manufacturers, global oil distributors, thousands of local mechanics, massive dealership networks, and traditional auto insurers. The winners? Well, the tech companies providing autonomous driving software, the mobility platforms coordinating the routing, advanced battery makers, and the entities controlling the massive streams of data and mapping infrastructure. The most valuable part of the transportation ecosystem is no longer the physical hardware of the car itself, but the software and the network running it.
Beyond the corporate winners and losers, there are incredible secondary social benefits. If private car ownership collapses, up to 80% of our parking spaces, concrete garages, and curbside metered parking could become completely obsolete. Imagine unlocking that massive amount of high-value urban land. City centers currently dominated by sprawling concrete lots could be aggressively transformed into affordable housing, lush green parks, and vibrant pedestrian spaces. Not to mention the vast reductions in traffic accidents due to computer-controlled driving and the newfound mobility access for the elderly, young children, and disabled individuals who previously couldn't get behind the wheel.
A 2026 reality check, grading the forecast.
So Rethinking Transportation was published back in 2017. As we push deep into the 2020s, it's time to objectively evaluate how Tony Seba and James Arbib's bold predictions are actually holding up in the real world. There are definitely several points heavily in favor of their model. Robo-taxi services, which were basically science fiction in 2017, have in fact launched. Companies like Waymo and Tesla are expanding their service areas, with driverless cars literally picking people up on city streets right now. Meanwhile, EV costs have plummeted exactly as they modeled, and consumer adoption in leading-edge markets is off the charts. Just take Norway, where battery electric vehicles hit roughly 94% of all new passenger car sales by 2025. The underlying tech trends they identified are absolutely real, and they're accelerating.
However, there are significant points against the specific super-aggressive timeline they laid out. That prediction of 95% TaaS dominance by 2030, yeah, that's currently looking pretty unlikely. Full Level 5 autonomy, where a car can drive anywhere in any condition without a steering wheel, is still geographically limited to select heavily mapped cities. Plus, widespread regulatory approvals are moving much slower than the authors anticipated. Navigating the slow grind of municipal and federal regulations takes years. And more importantly, private car ownership is nowhere near a total collapse yet. It turns out that technological friction, massive infrastructure development, and our deeply ingrained human emotional attachment to owning a car take way more time to overcome than a pure mathematical model might suggest.
Which leaves us with this final thought. Is this simply a case of the right idea but the wrong decade? The book serves as a brilliant scenario planning tool, completely challenging the lazy assumption that we'll just swap out our gas cars for electric ones in a simple one-for-one trade. It forces us to ask a deeper question. When mobility truly becomes a cheap, highly reliable, summonable service, How long until the private automobile truly goes the way of the horse? Think about whether you would actually trade the keys to your personal car for an extra $5,000 in your pocket every single year. And subscribe so you don't miss an episode.